The African continent is going to be the region hardest hit by climate change unless the issues of adaptation is prioritised. This is the view of delegates attending COP27 in Sharm El Sheikh in Egypt. Many countries on the African continent have experienced flooding due to unusually heavy rains as well as drought, particularly in the Horn of Africa. Meanwhile, a group of ministers will today hold a meeting to map a way forward on the continental position to climate change. For further developments on this at the COP27 summit, SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena joins us live from Sharm El Sheikh. Ms. Sophie, good morning to you. Great to see you once again. So this roadmap is expected to be mapped out. What are some of the key concerns that will be raised by this group of ministers with regard to climate change? And basically, who should be taking responsibility most for what we're seeing?
Well, you are correct, Griselda. The leaders or the ministers of environmental affairs who are responsible particularly to issues related to climate change are currently meeting behind closed doors. Earlier on, they had comments to make, and we heard the United Nations representatives saying that they do support the continent, particularly as a developing region, because you have to take care of the previous disadvantages that were there, particularly when you come to issues related to industrialization. You know that the countries, particularly the G7 countries, in their process of industrialization, they have really messed up the world, and therefore many are calling for developed countries, particularly the G20, to make a commitment in terms of resources and also finances to assist those countries that are affected and are developing and they don't have resources. But the issue also of the just energy transition, the Africa group will have to come up with one position in terms of what do they mean when they talk about just energy transition and what needs to be done. We know that South Africa has been very vocal on the issue of the just energy transition. The president saying that you cannot quickly move out of fossil fuel and drop the coal as a continent, because you still have to develop the continent, but also you are not at the level of development where you can just do this haphazardly, because you are going to lose jobs, livelihoods, and poverty and disgruntlement, restlessness on the continent is likely to ensue if you don't address the issue of just energy transition. And of course, the other issue is adaptation. How do you fund adaptation where you are going to ensure that particularly small communities are able to first of all learn and understand climate change, but also understand what they have to do when they experience floods or you have challenges of drought?
Ms. Sophie, there have also been concerns about, decisions or way forwards in the previous summits that have not been implemented. There have been calls for, decisions that were taken previously to be implemented. What is the delay, and what does this mean for the goals that these countries want to reach?
That is why Egypt, as the host country, took a decision that this will be a COP for implementation, not just talking heads where you make pledges and commitments, but you don't implement. And therefore, they are going to push for timeframes and targets and specific amounts and specific projects for implementation. As you pointed out, during COP15, in Paris, there was an agreement that an amount of 100 billion will be set aside to address climate change. But we are told that it's not clear whether that money was made available. There are reports that 80 billion has been spent, but other countries are saying we haven't seen anything. You also have a situation at Glasgow last year Many countries made commitments, some bilateral with other countries, others collectively with regions. We know that some G7 countries, including the European Union and some international financial institutions, made a commitment to assist South Africa in particular on its just energy transition program with 8.5 billion. But we don't know yet how that money is going to be spent, because you have a challenge whereby 95% of that amount are loans, and therefore the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, saying that you have to rearrange that finances and to ensure that a majority, or you have a chunk of grants, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we have to pay the loans and we can't survive. You know that South Africa is now very indebted, and we had, when the finance minister was addressing the framework for the budget next year, that we really have to service our debt, and therefore you cannot continue to go and borrow when you cannot pay, because generations to come will have a problem.
There were some protests that we saw, including where you were stationed yesterday. Are there any other protests today where you are?
Well, today we are not expecting any activities at the pavilion and the vicinities or where you have events, because they took a decision to take a break, but they will start on Monday. We know that many different groups will be protesting, trying to put across their views. Next week, we also want to focus on the island nations. You know that with the floods, you have a serious problem with island nations who are really suffering. We'll also look at Africa in relation to the Horn of Africa, where there is drought and people are suffering, which is leading to security challenges in the Sahel region. But later today, the Minister of Environmental Affairs from South Africa will open a South African pavilion at around 6 p.m. today, and we'll get more information, and a number of companies that are here, a very large contingent of business in this summit, and they are supporting South Africa, your financial institution, mining, and also other areas of business, and they are here to really make their voice heard in terms of how we can proceed, particularly on the issue of just energy transition. Earlier on, the UN representative on environment in Africa was talking about the G20 meeting, and this brought my mind that starting from tomorrow, the G20 leaders will converge in Bali, Indonesia. And the issue of climate change will also dominate the talks, while you also have other issues related to COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, and generally the global economy. And it is the global economy that is kind of derailing implementation of all agreements taken or commitment made in the previous meetings.
Sophie Mokoena, SABC News International Editor, thank you very much. Live to us from Sharm El Sheikh in Egypt. COP27 continues there. She'll continue to give us updates here on the SABC News channel about the latest developments there. South Africa's Minister of Environmental Affairs, Barbara Creecy, you heard, will be hosting, if we can, a South African section there where business is expected also to chip in there and share, I guess, some views on what can be done to stave off the effects of climate change, which I believe many analysts believe we're starting to see the effects of that with the kind of weather that we're seeing around the country here in South Africa.